the challenges of doing that. So welcome, Sumit. Thank you for joining us. Great to have you with us again.
Hi, David. Thanks very much for having me. Pleasure to be on today.
Not at all. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely.
Over to you, mate. No worries. Go for it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Absolutely. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Sumit. I'll be talking to you about the first steps to a more automated tomorrow. Before we go into that, a little bit more about myself. As David introduced, my name is Sumit. I'm from TOPdesk. I am a self-proclaimed donut connoisseur. Some may call me an addict. For sure, the last few months has been a regular food supply to my doorstep. Also, I am a graphic novel fan. For those of you that don't recognize the term, you may also understand the word comic book. I have a massive collection upstairs in my library, which I am an avid fan of. In my spare time, I am the head of consultancy in the UK for TOPdesk. And today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the reality points of AI and automation in our world, in the service desk world, and realistically where we are right now versus where we perhaps would like to be, or where we see industry showing we should be, and the kind of gaps in the middle. More importantly, where can we start? Now, before I go any further, I want to share some of my AI and automation journey with yourself. And funnily enough, this happened quite literally last week, where I was looking to cancel a credit card simply because I didn't need it any longer. And fortunately enough, on my through my bank, there was the option to use a chatbot to do exactly that. So here you can see I put in the simple term, I want to cancel the credit card. That makes sense to everyone, right? If you think about that terminology, it pops into my mind straight away. Now, as soon as that triggered off, the chatbot didn't recognize that term. It didn't understand it. It gave me an option of either, I believe it was to check my balance or to check another query. And as you can see here, this is a screenshot from the conversation happening with the digital assistant. It led me to none of these. Okay, so let's try that again. I've used cancel. Everyone focus on that term. So that didn't work. So then I thought, okay, fine, close credit card. And bear in mind, this is the matter of minutes. This wasn't a catastrophic fail, but I found it quite funny because the moment I said close credit card, it uses the terminology that I've put in previously. And that proves a very simple but important point, is that simple little caveats like that, like wording, it can come down to a single key word, is still a very much a valid issue within AI and, more importantly, automation processes to this day. We talk a lot about and we see a lot of attention on things like chatbots, especially to try and alleviate that ever growing demand to reduce people workforce, and we replace it with automation. You see that these little caveats still are very much a valid issue that we as organizations still have a challenge to fix today. Now, enough about myself. Let's find out a bit more about your journey with AI and automation right now. So, David, I think we can fire up a poll here, right? With a simple question: how would you describe your service desk's current relationship with automation? And I believe the poll is now open. Perfect. Let's give a couple of minutes for people to fire that away. David, feel free to jump in with what the results are as they come along.
Hi, Sumit. I'm just jumping back in. Apologies, I was just trying to fix the screen in the back end. Jumped in, and so you've got a quick poll. Now, normally what we do for you and our listeners, we sort of manage this through. So if you'd like some help, more than happy to do that. Now, we can see the questions there. We're just giving everybody an opportunity to fill in or select the option there. And once we've done that, we'll close it. So I'm hoping that we've got a, let me just see how we've, have we got the numbers there? No, can't see the numbers. No worries. So if you could complete that, if you could select your option, and we'll give another sort of 10 or 15 seconds to close, and then we'll close the poll. There we go. Now, I'm hoping you can see those. If not, I'll read them out. Can you see those, Sumit?
No, I can't,
Yeah,
but
no
feel
worries.
free to.
No worries. So I'm going to give you the answers, and guys. So we've got the 4 options there. The winning option by far, 60% said that they're still figuring out where to begin, which that's a high number. So I don't know how you feel about that. We've got 1% who've said that they've mastered it. 1% said that they've mastered it. Got 32% that have said that they're just getting to grips with it, but could learn more. We've got 60% who are still trying to figure it out, and 7% that haven't started at all. So that lovely little bell curve with the big number there, still figuring out where to begin.
Thanks very much, David. And that proves a massive point. We are still very much in the early life cycle of AI and automation, especially for the masses. While we may see in various forms and shapes where organizations are at the pinnacle of what we believe to be future technology, for the mass majority, it is still very much a case of figuring out where to begin. And that's fantastic that the audience also reflects that, because as we see it, that's very much the reality of the current situation. Now, I think a couple of things that many of us will be finding relevant in the next few weeks. For myself, getting a haircut. More importantly, I've got mine booked for Thursday after many months. And for many more of us, booking an outdoor restaurant or an outdoor pub location. Now, little throwback to 2018. Many of you, if you haven't seen it, at some point later on, Google, send a little search to Google Duplex AI demo, and you will have seen Google's attempt at basically using AI algorithms to create and mimic a conversation, which in the first demonstration allows them to book a haircut appointment flawlessly to the point where you can't tell it's not another human being. And the second one being to order a restaurant booking for a Chinese restaurant. Now, this very much is at the pinnacle of what we currently see as AI functionality and automation practices. However, there is a big caveat which most people tend to overlook. Google themselves say their duplex technology, while having spent years in development and using hundreds of thousands of hours of telephone conversations and voice conversations to analyze and reach that point where they're able to pull off two-minute demos, is something that points out a massive factor for us. AI technology, automation pieces, are essentially as intelligent as the data that they're fed. That's essentially what it is. When you buy into this technology, when you take this on in a new system, whether it's a chatbot or some digital assistant, etc., something like that, what you're purchasing are those algorithms. And essentially an algorithm is the function to be able to predict a future outcome or future decision based on historical information. Now, these organizations that when we put out AI pieces, automation pieces, we're providing the algorithms, we're providing the function. However, how effective they are highly dependent on the information that they're fed. So imagine this, you buy a high performance sports car, you buy a brand new luxury kitchen, but what about simply if you actually end up putting rubbish ingredients into it? You use it to, I don't know, just fry an omelet. You put some cheap oil into your car. You can imagine that over time, that poor quality ingredients will lead to malfunctions, misuse, bad temperament. Imagine if we're all eating a very unhealthy diet. The same principles go towards effective AI and automation development. And more importantly, in the last few weeks, if you've been paying attention to Netflix, you would have seen this in this program, Coded Bias, which clearly reflects, well, here's what potentially and actually is already going wrong if we don't pay attention to the quality and integrity of the information we're feeding these AI and automation systems. And the main thing being is that we already see this in organizations. They go in, they buy the latest and greatest, or they're sold on a very nice idea. They buy in these systems, which essentially are the quality algorithms. However, they overlook a massive, massive caveat. They, as an organization, are solely responsible for the quality of the information these systems are being fed, which leads us to the first step that I'd recommend for us today for the future of automation, whether it's in the service desk or our organization as a whole, and that is quality control. Just in the conversation before, David and my fellow panelists was talking about the kind of future roles as we see it, and a lot more going into development and support. Now, while that's all important because of these algorithms continuously needing to be progressed to refine them and make them more effective, there's a massive area where we see there will be a future need and demand that isn't being met right now. Data quality assurance. Now, this isn't really about a data scientist per se. It's simply about monitoring the quality of information that we have. For example, from the service desk, the tickets that we're feeding into this chatbot system, is it actually got relevant information? Are the categories correct? Are our priorities correct? Are the outcomes of these solutions that we're teaching it to use as a decision matrix actually accurate to the result that we want to perform? We can already see that in the wider world, in some cases, automation of inefficient processes is actually just increasing the duration that it takes to actually resolve something, because simply the information being fed isn't up to a good enough standard. Going back to that point, the algorithms, remember, the quality of the future predictions depends on the historical information. And we see this as a massive need for individuals, for people to fill this role of quality control in the future. And this isn't simply saying that you need to be a data scientist. It could be as easy as saying, well, hang on, have we got the right key phrases in place? As you saw before in my example, have we got the right information following the correct processes that we want to follow? And is the historical information that we're feeding it reflective of these processes as we want to follow them? This is a huge area where we see already the demand, but it will only grow as we go forward in quality control roles. It could be as simple as saying data quality analyst. It could be in the sense of service desk information analyst, all monitoring the quality information that we feed these organizations and these AI systems. Now, more importantly, this is something that while you may not have started with an AI system or automation system today, it's already vital to start looking at the quality of information depending on what processes that you want to fit that in. And that takes us to the second step, which is quite interesting because we've already heard about it in the previous conversation, is essentially from our perspective, identify those human conversations. Because at the end of the day, regardless of how vast and massively widespread we see AI systems and automated processes, there will always be the need to have a people conversation when the situation calls for it. And what that means is, okay, we may not need the same number of workforce speaking to other people. However, if we want to be successful as organizations, if we want to be customer centric, if we want to have those bridges still connected, there will always be the need for a person to step in when the situation calls for it. And where we see it quite often are those high emotional conversations. If, for example, there's an escalated situation, imagine there's a mass outage on a system and people simply can't do their work. And the department or the business as a whole will want reassurance. And as it stands right now, that reassurance, that emotional bridge, still is primarily the success factor when you have a person-to-person conversation. getting an email or getting a chatbot update from an AI system simply does not provide enough of that reassurance factor as we see it right now. For those of you in education, imagine a student has accidentally deleted their thesis and they need it tomorrow, and believe me, it still definitely happens. Those conversations where they escalate to the need of high emotional vulnerability is still a massive area where we need people to have those people conversations. At the same time, if we want people to focus on those human conversations, we also need to make sure they're not delving into the repetitive tasks of 10 years ago, which is quite interesting because that takes me onto an analysis that we did last year with an organization. We partnered with an organization called Census-Wide. And one of the questions we asked is, what is the most important current engagement channel with your customer? Bearing in mind, this was done at the peak of the first COVID lockdown in the UK. So from our perspective, these 500 C-level individuals of organizations that we asked were very much in the remote working era. Now, many of us will think, okay, it's got to be something automated. From our perspective, we see a lot of the customer demand and data focusing on self-service, for example, being a prime channel. So from my perspective, I put the money on being self-service. There's no way it could be anything other than email. The number one channel was email. Okay, all right, fine. Telephone was number two. Fine, okay, all right. Self-service has got to come in. In fact, self-service didn't come in until 6th place. Bearing in mind, where we put chat, we put that as a manual chat system, not an AI automated chat bot. But this proves a massive point. Those top 5 channels that are looked at as the most important engagement channels are still required to be monitored by people. So going back to what we talked about a little bit before around where we said, let's automate these factors, then how do we do that when we've still got people monitoring these methodologies? In fact, self-service only is one of the only ways where you can implement knowledge automation and AI systems effectively. Email still requires people to monitor it. Yes, you could send an automatic reply, but it still has a massive factor on people needing to monitor these channels and manually respond back. Which takes us to the third step, and I think that sums up the point quite well. Target the tennis elbow tasks. And I call that because essentially we all know tennis elbow comes from repetitive strain, wearing away. Essentially the same thing goes for us in organizations, and more importantly in our service desk. If we are looking and have a pressure to reduce a workforce, as we see in many cases because of budget restrictions or trying to follow the trend, we also have to make sure our people are not still focusing on these repetitive tasks. For example, password reset. So let's recap that while I finish off. The 3 current steps that we see the massive demand for a successful automated tomorrow. People focusing on quality control roles to make sure that we have that prime quality data to feed any future systems. Identifying where we still need to have those human conversations, especially when it has a high escalation priority or potentially a lot of emotional impact to those specific processes. And finally, making sure that we target those tennis elbow tasks as the first point of call to automate and eliminate from our people workforce. Thanks very much for listening for everyone, guys. You can find us on Twitter, also on TOPdesk.com to find any information. Or if you want to get in touch with myself, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'll throw it back to David. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sumit. Some really interesting stuff there. Really interesting stuff, and really calls into question, what we're trying to do as an industry, and how either organizations, service owners, the providers, even the consumers of service, what they think and expect as well. And to see self-service in 6th place is incredible. I know the adoption is always a challenge, right? But after sort of last year, you'd expect it to sort of be going a slightly different way, Incredible to still see email at #1 there, and I know we haven't got enough time for questions to submit, unfortunately, right? But
No
I certainly
worries.
think that from a cultural perspective, the shift in the way that we think a service